And so here we have the beginnings of a hand-built compost pile. This is a multimedia learning experience, so you will be reading the booklet to get information and watching this video series. This video series is very specifically a visual learning experience. And what we've done here is taken the principles of composting down to the smallest scale of a 3x3 pile. Please refer to the booklet for recipe formation. We will not be going into that in detail in this video. But you certainly can take these principles and use them on a mid-size scale or a large-scale composting. The first layer is what we like to call the bulking, or the material that we have the most of. This material is actually a perfect 3-to-1 ratio. It's from our barn, where our dairy cow has been a lot of the winter time, depositing her manure, her urine, on top of wheat straw. This straw is mainly put down in a large amount so that even in the barn, it's at a ratio of 3 parts to 1 part. This is what will make up most of the compost pile. But today, we are also demonstrating if you had other materials on the farm, for example, grass clippings or straw or leaves, this is how you would incorporate them into the pile. You can see right now that a person is constantly adding water as the pile is being built. It is essential at this stage, when you are first building the compost pile, to add copious amounts of water. In some ways, you can't add too much water at this stage, as it will be incorporated into the composting process. Also, you can see that an individual is starting to shape the dimensions of the compost pile. This pile is going to be roughly 3 feet by 3 feet and about 4 feet tall. It is important when you're putting layers down to make sure that they're uniform and that there isn't a concentration of green or a concentration of brown in any of your layers. Now they're going to add a layer of leaves. Leaves are very interesting to compost because they are almost the perfect 3-to-1 or 30-to-1 ratio. In fact, some people make compost exclusively from leaves. In this context, we're going to add leaves to our mixture, into our recipe, because they add a lot of micronutrients that are gathered from the trees during the spring and summer months. It's a great way to enrich your compost. One particular interesting thing about leaves is that the structure of leaves has a waxy coating on the outside. So when you're making compost from leaves, it's important that you mix them and smash them or masticate them in a way to break up the waxy coating. By making a layered compost pile, the Indori method, it makes the carbon and nitrogen sources available to the microbes. So you want to make sure that you make layers that are no thicker than 4 inches or so. This way, you can ensure that the microbes will have easy access to nitrogenous and carbonous materials. Again, as the pile is being formed, the composters are paying particular attention to the dimensions and the shape of the pile. If a pile is too large, it can easily cool down too quickly, and the microbes can lose their moisture, and so the decomposition process can stop. Conversely, if the pile is too small, there isn't enough mass for it to have its own identity and to decompose properly. The next layer will be grass clippings. Grass clippings are a wonderful addition to any compost pile, but they have particular characteristics that make them both easy and difficult to use. The fresh grass is easily digested by the microbes because of its small particle size. However, because of this, it can easily mat down and become anaerobic. So when using grass clippings, it's important to use an ingredient that adds fluff to the grass clippings. This is why we will be using straw today, for it is hollow in the middle and will add an element of porosity to the pile. Again, make sure you evenly distribute this nitrogenous layer throughout the entire surface of the compost pile. 1 wheelbarrow of grass clippings is 1 part of the recipe. 3 parts or 3 wheelbarrows of straw will make the perfect carbon to nitrogen ratio when working with grass clippings and straw. As you can see, the straw is very dry and will need lots of water. Luckily, the grass clippings have quite a bit of water inherently in them, and so the addition of this water will keep the straw nice and moist. At this point, you might be able to imagine that this is a multi-course meal with lots of different elements in the compost pile to keep the microbes happy, just like you were a chef making a nice meal for someone. Lots of different kinds of elements will bring lots of different diversity to your compost pile. You could continue doing layers and layers of straw and grass clippings if you had that material on hand. For our purposes here, we are going to go back to the base material, which is cow manure, urine, and straw. And in between those layers, we'll add more leaves. But the important thing to remember is stockpile your carbon materials, your nitrogen materials, and determine the recipe, and then make layers of those differing materials if you are making an Indori style hand-built pile. A word about water. Make sure that the water you're using isn't chlorinated or treated with anything. Periodically, you'll want to tamper down the compost pile with your fork, because just as though you're worried about the porosity of the pile, you also want to make sure that the pile doesn't have too much air in it, for then it will dry out. Everything with composting is finding the right balance. Just like cooking, you need to constantly be adjusting things. Just like making a loaf of bread, the actual dimensions and how the compost pile looks and the care that you put into initially making the dimensions of the compost pile goes a long way. Form and function. Now that the pile has reached almost a height of 2 feet, you can see that it's starting to take form and that it has almost a life of its own. This is why we say the compost body. And overnight it will be populated with fungus, bacterium, especially the kind that are heat-loving at this stage. Composting can be so rewarding. You are taking materials that people consider as waste, regenerating it into this life-giving material. Again, another layer of leaves, taking good care to make sure they're all very well hydrated. And finally, the last layer for this pile, but it doesn't have to be your last layer, will be the starting material from the cow barn. Depending on the climate you live in, some compost piles will have a rounded top. Here in California, the tops are flat, so as to capture any moisture that would collect in the pile in the morning, for example, morning dew. On the East Coast, you may want to create a domed style pile, for it rains year-round. One final gesture, we put the thermometer in the compost pile. Right now, it'll register ambient temperatures, but by tomorrow, it will be up to 120 degrees.